It was a hot day in 1933, thousands of feet in the sky. A small plane was flying with its last few drops of fuel. The pilot looked anxiously at the fuel gauge, which was now almost touching empty. Just 2 months earlier, he had learned how to fly this plane. But his biggest problem was not the fuel running out in the plane thousands of feet up. But a long list of troubles included some British officers he had left behind in Bahrain. The certainty of being arrested upon landing in Iran, the rolling waves of the Persian Gulf below, and the growing possibility that before the fuel ran out, he would not be able to reach any safe place. But despite all this, Wilson kept moving forward because the mission he had set out on was far bigger than these small problems. And his mission was to crash this very plane into the world's highest mountain, Mount Everest. Welcome once again to the videos, viewers, Maurice Wilson. Maurice Wilson was born on April 21st, 1898 in Yorkshire, in the house of a middle-class textile mill owner. For Maurice, if the Great War had not started at age 16, perhaps he would have joined his family's textile business. But instead, following in the footsteps of his elder brother Victor, he joined the British Army on his 18th birthday. He was eager to get to the battlefield quickly. Finally, in November 1917, Wilson was sent to France, where the Germans were attacking the British Army. By 7 o'clock in the morning, the Germans had surrounded 3 of the 4 companies of Wilson's battalion. But Wilson, who was still in the remaining D Company, kept firing blindly at the Germans from the machine gun. Post Wilson was very stubborn, a stubbornness that could even kill someone. But he emerged from that war without injury. He was the last soldier in his company who was not wounded, and for his bravery, he was awarded the Military Cross, because it was thanks to him that the German attack was stopped. But only a few months after receiving this award, in June, Wilson was sent back to the front line. On July 19th, 1918, Wilson was advancing with a small team when a German machine gunner saw them and opened fire. Wilson was shot in the back and left side, but he survived. This wound caused pain and weakness in his arm, which haunted him for the rest of his life. For many months, Wilson remained admitted to hospital because of his wounds. After that, he was sent to a reserve battalion. But perhaps misfortune was written in his fate. As soon as he arrived there, he contracted influenza, which at that time was spreading rapidly across the world. This illness sent him back to a hospital bed, and it was lying on that bed that the First World War ended. During treatment, Wilson wrote a letter to the War Ministry requesting a pension for his injuries, but the ministry rejected this request because, according to military doctors, his injuries were not serious enough to warrant payment. This refusal deeply upset Wilson, and it planted a rebellion in his heart against the ruling system. This hatred stayed with him until, in 1919, he was demobilized and sent home. Wilson faced the same question that thousands of other World War I soldiers faced. We made so many sacrifices and were wounded, but the return we received was not good. Wilson was now broken inside and wanted to do something big with his life. For the next 10 years, he wandered around the world. During this time, he married twice and changed many businesses. But by 1932, he had not found the peace he was searching for. On top of that, the war wounds continued to trouble him, and his health was deteriorating day by day. During this period, Wilson met a holy man who said that if he fasted for a few days, all his problems would be solved. Wilson actually fasted for several weeks and spent his time in prayers. Few months later, he returned to society completely healthy, not only free of his depression, but also cured of illness. Now his conviction grew even stronger, that any problem in the world could be solved by fasting and prayers. Wilson began taking on new challenges. He claimed that by the power of his fasting, he would do something for the world that no one had done before. During this period, one day his eyes fell on a newspaper article about the British Mount Everest expedition of 1924. In that mission, George Mallory and Andrew Irvin had tried to reach the summit of the world's highest mountain, Mount Everest, but both disappeared on the way. Wilson now had a purpose. He resolved to conquer Mount Everest. He decided to do it alone, relying on his fasts and prayers. But the question was, how to climb Mount Everest? Wilson knew that to go to Everest, the mission required a lot of money. Various gear had to be purchased, and all those expenses were borne by sponsors. And above all, it required a great deal of training. But he was looking for a shortcut to bypass all these requirements. In 1932, an Everest mission called the Houston Expedition was making headlines. In that mission, for the first time, a plane would fly over Mount Everest and take photographs from there. Remember that at that time, Mount Everest had not yet been conquered by anyone, and the world was eager to see the mountain's summit. Here, a raw, crazy idea was born in Wilson's mind. He thought he would join that expedition, and when the plane was over Everest, he would jump by parachute, and thus become the first person in the world to reach the summit of Everest. A few weeks later, he dismissed that idea as impossible, but then conceived an idea even more dangerous. Yes, Wilson had completely gone mad. He planned to buy his own plane and crash-land it in the snow on Mount Everest at 15,000 feet. That way, more than half the route would be covered. And the remaining half he would complete alone with fasting and prayers. Here. It is important to understand that Maurice Wilson had neither mountaineering experience nor flying experience. He had done a little bit of hill climbing practice, but had not attempted to learn technical mountaineering. After that, he bought a 3-year-old de Havilland Gypsy Moth aircraft, which had previously been part of a flying circus. It was a wooden 2-seater open cockpit biplane, which at that time was quite popular in recreational aero clubs. He had Everest written on the side of the plane, a name he made himself that perhaps resembled Mount Everest. During pilot training, his instructor clearly told him that he would never even reach India, but Wilson stuck to his stubbornness. During this time, the British Air Ministry discovered his mission, and they did not want Wilson to attempt such folly. The British Air Ministry informed the Nepalese authorities of Wilson's plan, and they cancelled his permission to enter Nepalese airspace. This was bad news because Wilson had planned to reach Everest via Nepal, but he was willing to go to any length to satisfy his stubbornness. He called the media to the Stag Lane Aerodrome airfield in London and tore up the British Air Ministry telegram in front of everyone, and took off without caring about any permission. Everest, filled with extra fuel drums, could travel up to 750 miles. Wilson made refueling stops in Freiburg in Germany, Marseille in France, Pisa, Naples and Sicily in Italy. It was a beautiful and almost trouble-free journey. But after crossing the Mediterranean, the difficulties began. In Tunisia, the police arrested him, but he was soon released. Also in Tunis, he accidentally filled the plane's fuel tank with water-contaminated fuel. But luck was with him, and he managed to make a safe landing in the Tunisian city of Gabes. There, he refueled properly, and then set off via Tripoli, Benghazi, Tobruk, and Alexandria toward Egypt. When he reached Cairo, he received bad news. The permit to fly over Iran, which he had been assured would be waiting for him in Cairo, was nowhere to be found. He spent the whole day going from one British officer to another, but perhaps the British themselves had deliberately held up his permit. Instead of wasting time in bureaucracy, Wilson flew straight to Baghdad. Now Iran lay ahead of him, but he did not have permission to land there. So he had to find a new route, but the problem was that he did not have a good detailed map. He landed in Baghdad and bought a children's school atlas in the market and marked his route on it, and then set off for Bahrain. During this time, the British officers had started thinking one step ahead of Wilson. They had already sent telegrams to his next stop. When Wilson arrived in Bahrain, a British officer called him to his office. The officer plainly told him that there were no airstrips ahead for his small plane. Only one place in Iran, and if he landed there without a permit, he would be arrested. The officer told Wilson that he could refuel his plane in Bahrain, but only on the condition that he fly straight back to London from there. Wilson agreed to this, but when he took off, instead of heading toward London, he took a direct turn east toward India, flying along the southern edge of the Persian Gulf, avoiding Iran. He had secretly seen on the British officer's map a new strip near Iran, and that was Gwadar, which had formerly been part of India. After several hours when his plane's fuel gauge was almost at zero, Wilson landed safely at the Gwadar airstrip. Wilson continued his journey through British India, where a new wave of press enthusiasm awaited him. He traveled across India celebrating his success, and finally reached the town of Purna in northeast India, which is very close to the Nepal border. But the long arm of the British government reached him again at the Purnea airstrip. The local police were waiting for him. They seized Everest and placed security guards on Wilson. The British government reminded him again that despite having a plane, Wilson had no permission to fly over Nepal. Wilson was now badly trapped. He not only lacked permission, but could no longer fly his plane because it had been seized. He was stuck between the British government and his dwindling funds. Finally, in July 1933, he was forced to sell Everest. His plan to crash-land the plane on Mount Everest was completely ruined. But he still did not give up his obsession to climb Everest. He spent the winter in Darjeeling, India, fasting, praying, and attempting to obtain a permit to enter Tibet so he could climb Mount Everest from the Tibetan side. But every attempt failed. Finally, he secretly began planning to climb Mount Everest on foot. On March 21st, 1934, Wilson, disguised as a Buddhist monk, set out on foot and crossed Sikkim to reach Tibet. After 1 or 2 attempts, he returned from Mount Everest base camp because lack of training and shortness of breath were worsening his condition. In May 1934, Wilson set out for Everest again, but this time with 2 companions. These 2 companions were experienced, so on this occasion they reached Camp 3. In just 3 days, Wilson left his companions at Camp 3 and went ahead alone. His companions strongly advised him not to go further, but he did not listen to anyone. This was the same stubbornness that could kill a person. Wilson gave his companions one final instruction that if he did not return within 2 weeks, they should consider him dead. But they waited. Not 2 weeks, but a full month. When Wilson did not return to Camp 3, they left Everest and descended. At the end of July, they reached India and reported Wilson's death. Finally, another English mountaineer had become a victim of the terrifying world of Everest. A year after this event, in 1935, Eric Shipton's Everest expedition found Wilson's body. He was lying between Mount Everest and Changsi, below the North Col Pass, among his backpack, diary, and torn tent. The last entry in his diary was dated May 31st, 1934, in which he had written, "Setting off again. What a beautiful day." If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment your thoughts below. Your support means a lot,